Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live exploded into chaos after a confrontation between Jimmy Kimmel and President Donald Trump turned unexpectedly vicious, culminating in accusations of racism, explosive claims about immigration, and a shocking twist that left Kimmel humiliated and viewers stunned. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for more explosive stories like this. The night was already heavy with tension long before President Donald Trump stepped onto the stage. The crowd was buzzing, partly in excitement, partly in confusion. It was rare to see a sitting president, especially one as polarizing as Trump, appear on late-night television, let alone Jimmy Kimmel Live, a show not exactly known for being sympathetic to the former businessman turned commander-in-chief. Trump entered with his usual bravado, waving to a mixed reception of applause and scattered boos. His signature red tie stood in stark contrast to the set's blue and purple hues, almost as if defying the color palette on purpose. Jimmy Kimmel, leaning back in his chair, smiled, though it was the kind of smile that came with gritted teeth. The kind you wear before a bar fight, not before a polite interview. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kimmel began, with that rehearsed tone of playful sarcasm, "I never thought I'd say this, but welcome President Donald Trump." Trump nodded. "Thanks, Jimmy. I know this isn't exactly friendly territory, but I figured I'd give you the ratings boost." The audience gave a cautious laugh. Kimmel grinned tighter. The interview began as expected. Light jabs, questions about golf, COVID, even Melania. But it didn't take long before Kimmel veered off script. Somewhere around the 15-minute mark, his tone shifted, his shoulders straightened, and the crowd felt it. The moment before the drop. "So, Mr. President," Kimmel said, cocking his head like a prosecutor about to lay out his case, "let's talk about your rally in Arizona last week. There was a quote you made about preserving American culture and watching who comes into our country. That sounds a lot like the language racists used back in the 1950s to justify segregation. Was that intentional? Or just muscle memory?" A thick silence gripped the room. Trump blinked slowly. "Excuse me?" Kimmel didn't flinch. "You've said things in the past, Mr. President, about Mexicans, about Muslims, about Haitians, and now this. So let's not pretend you're some clean slate." It's hard not to look at that speech and hear echoes of George Wallace. You're a man who's made a career out of dog whistles and gaslighting. A low murmur stirred in the audience. One woman audibly said, "Wow," as Trump's face stiffened. "What you just said," Trump replied after a pause, his voice measured, "is not only wrong, it's slander. You want to call me a racist on national television because it gets you applause? Because it makes your Hollywood friends clap for you when you're sipping champagne in the green room?" Kimmel raised an eyebrow. "I'm calling out a pattern. If that pattern makes you uncomfortable, maybe there's something to think about." Trump leaned forward now. "Or maybe you're just so desperate for a viral moment that you'll throw the word racist around like candy. Maybe you're the one playing a character, Jimmy. Because God forbid you actually sit across from someone you disagree with and talk like an adult." But Kimmel wasn't done. He shook his head, motioned for the camera to punch in, and dropped what would become the spark to ignite the firestorm. "You're the only president in modern history to refer to African nations as shithole countries. You stood in front of the world and called neo-Nazis very fine people. You tried to ban an entire religion. And now you're back here talking about preserving culture. What culture, Donald? The white kind?" Gasps rippled across the studio. Trump blinked again, slowly, and then suddenly grinned. "Jimmy, you want to go there? Fine. Let's go there." And just like that, something shifted. The audience stopped laughing. Kimmel leaned back, perhaps realizing he'd touched something volatile. And Trump? Well, Trump leaned in. "You think you're making a moral stand?" Trump said, voice lowering, almost conspiratorial. "You think you're standing up for something, don't you? But here's what you're really doing. You're putting your name in headlines. You're selling moral superiority like a product. And you don't care who gets trampled in the process. Kimmel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Trump sat up straighter now, his voice growing stronger. You want to talk about immigrants? You want to talk about race? Fine. But let's not pretend that your coastal bubble gives you license to speak for working-class Americans whose lives have been flipped upside down. Let's not pretend that pretending to care is the same as actually caring. The audience was locked in. No one coughed. No one even moved. You call it racism to talk about illegal immigration, Trump continued. But let me ask you this. Have you ever been to a border town? Have you talked to a mother whose daughter was kidnapped by a cartel member who crossed illegally? Have you sat in a hospital where victims of fentanyl overdoses, smuggled in through our southern border, are being zipped into body bags at 19 years old? Kimmel was still. The cameras held on his face, waiting for a rebuttal. But he didn't. Speak. Not yet. Trump looked around the room, scanning the faces, letting the silence sit. You think it's edgy to call me a racist? He said softly now. But what's truly reckless is using buzzwords to silence conversations that this country needs to have. It's not racist to want safety. It's not racist to care about your own citizens first. It's not racist to demand laws be followed. Another pause. It's leadership. The audience didn't applaud, but not because they were against him. They simply didn't know how to respond. The shift had been seismic. Trump was no longer playing defense. He had flipped the script. Kimmel's smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable. Trump had hijacked the room. Kimmel finally leaned forward. So you're saying it's about law and order now? Trump smiled. I'm saying it's always been about protecting Americans, Jimmy. Something you forgot about somewhere between your punchlines and your moral posturing. And that's where it ended. For now. The tension in the room was unbearable. No one knew where this was going next, only that it had just gone somewhere they didn't expect. And then Jimmy glanced at his cue card and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed more loudly than expected, punctuating the charged silence like a gunshot. A laugh broke out from someone in the back row, nervous, misplaced, and was instantly swallowed by the silence that followed. Jimmy didn't even look up. He dropped the torn pieces to the floor like they were contaminated. All right, Kimmel said, his voice calm but steely. No script, no filter. Let's do this raw. Trump adjusted his jacket, not breaking eye contact. You sure about that? You came here for a conversation, didn't you? Jimmy asked. Let's stop pretending this is an interview. Trump shrugged. Your words, not mine. Jimmy leaned forward, his elbows on the desk that now felt more like a barricade between two ideologies than a piece of furniture. You sit there and act like you're this noble crusader for forgotten Americans. But you've spent your life in gold elevators. You call yourself a man of the people, but you own a plane with your name on it in 3-story letters. And yet here I am, Trump shot back. While people like you sip soy lattes in Beverly Hills and make 6 figures talking down to the rest of the country, I actually went to those places you joke about. Ohio, West Virginia, the parts of America you only mention when it's time to make a documentary or win an award. Kimmel grinned coldly. Yeah, you went there. You held rallies. You gave speeches. You stirred them up with fear and promised a wall. And guess what? The wall didn't save them. The jobs didn't come back. The factories are still empty. You think that's on me? Trump's voice sharpened. You ever hear of NAFTA, China, the globalist trade policies that shipped every job out of America, while guys like you cheered it on from your Malibu mansions? I didn't cause the fire, Jimmy. I showed up with a hose while your party was too busy posting hashtags. You showed up with gasoline, Jimmy snapped. Trump's eyes flashed. And you showed up with a camera. The crowd was frozen, unsure whether to applaud or recoil. Let me ask you this, Trump continued, now fully in command of the room. Have you ever stood in front of a father who lost his daughter to a drunk-driving illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times but kept coming back? Kimmel hesitated. Trump pressed. No, you haven't. Because if you had, maybe you wouldn't be so quick to slap the racist label on anyone who says, hey, maybe we should enforce the laws we already have. You ever go to a police officer's funeral, Jimmy? I have. You ever hold the mother of a kid who overdosed on fentanyl because it came over the border that everyone pretends isn't a problem? I have. Jimmy didn't look away, but something in his face cracked. Just a fraction. Enough. You know what I think? Trump said. I think you're scared. Not of me, but of the fact that people might be listening to me. That I might be making sense. No, Kimmel replied sharply. I think you're dangerous. Because you make fear sound like logic. Trump laughed, slow and sardonic. Fear is when you build a wall around your ideas and pretend they're immune to reality. I'm talking facts, but facts make you uncomfortable because they don't clap. Kimmel shook his head. You're rewriting the story in real time. No, Trump said. I'm just not letting you narrate it. That line hit like a slap. Kimmel shifted, sitting back now, no longer leaning in. For the first time his tone dropped from defiant to deliberate. You keep bringing up fentanyl and cartel violence like it's the fault of immigrants. But let's talk about what you never mention. The corporate lobbyists you catered to. The tax cuts that helped billionaires more than anyone in those towns you keep bringing up. You want to talk taxes now? Trump leaned in, mock incredulous. Because let's not pretend Hollywood pays theirs. You think I care about Hollywood? Jimmy fired back. This isn't about actors or Twitter. This is about the guy who sat in the highest office in the land and acted like immigrants were poison. You talk about border towns. How many immigrants built the towers you put your name on? How many cleaned the toilets in your casinos? Trump nodded slowly. And how many of them came here legally, Jimmy? You keep changing the topic. I'm not against immigration. I'm against chaos. That's your version of order? Banning Muslims? Ripping kids from their parents? Trump's face hardened. You mean enforcing laws that were on the books before I ever walked into the White House? The audience stirred again, no longer sure who was winning this. The lines weren't as clean as they wanted. No applause signs were lit. Jimmy looked down, then back up. His voice was colder now, more surgical. You ever wonder why you keep getting indicted? He asked quietly. Why you're always the one in the courtroom? While everyone else is just talking? Trump didn't flinch. Because I said no to the machine. Or maybe, Kimmel said, his voice rising, it's because you were always part of it. And when it turned on you, you just cried foul. Trump stood now calmly, not storming, not angry, just standing. The audience tensed. You invited me here? He said. You thought you'd ambush me with applause lines and gotcha questions? But the problem with fighting in front of a live audience is that sometimes they listen, and sometimes they hear something you didn't want them to hear. Kimmel stood too, defensive. Don't flatter yourself. I'm not, Trump replied. I'm just reminding you, you don't own the narrative anymore. The tension between them was volcanic. You could feel the crew behind the cameras, silently begging for a commercial break that wasn't coming. Jimmy stepped around the desk now, facing Trump with nothing in between. His voice dropped. You're not walking out of here looking like a hero. I didn't come here to be a hero, Trump said. I came to be heard. Kimmel's eyes narrowed. Then say it. One sentence. Sum it all up. What do you want? People to walk away from this thinking? Trump didn't miss a beat. I want them to remember that protecting your country doesn't make you a villain, and that pretending problems don't exist doesn't make you a saint. Silence. No applause. Just silence. Kimmel turned to the audience, then to the cameras, then back to Trump, and for a split second he looked uncertain. The moment dragged. Then Kimmel, jaw tight, raised a hand toward the offstage curtain. "You know what? I think we're done here." Trump raised his brow, amused. "Already? I thought we were just getting started." Kimmel didn't laugh. "Secret Service," he said, clearly not joking. "Please escort the president off the set." Gasps erupted. A cameraman cursed under his breath. Trump didn't argue. He adjusted his jacket again, smoothed his tie, and turned slowly toward the curtain. But before he left, he looked back once more. "To everyone watching," he said, his voice calm, "ask yourself why this man invited me here just to silence me when he didn't like the answers." He walked off to a stunned silence. Kimmel remained frozen, eyes locked on the curtain where Trump had disappeared. The room was silent. The audience, caught between applause, gasps, and the sheer weight of what had just transpired, didn't know how to react. The cameras continued to roll, suspended in a long, awkward live broadcast that had abandoned all traces of traditional format. For a full 5 seconds, Jimmy didn't speak. Then he took a breath, slow and deliberate. "Cut the cameras," he said. But the cameras didn't cut. Somewhere in the booth, producers were either in stunned paralysis or made a deliberate decision to keep broadcasting. Either way, the live feed held. Kimmel in the spotlight, empty guest chair to his right, a nation watching with bated breath. Jimmy stepped back behind his desk. He didn't sit. "I didn't expect that," he finally said, voice quieter now. "Not like that." He picked up the torn cue card pieces and tossed them in the trash beneath the desk. There was no smile, no trademark sarcasm, no attempt at recovery. His show had taken a turn that not even the writers could have scripted. And for the first time in years, Kimmel seemed without a clear punchline. Backstage, muffled shouting could be heard. Security communicating with Trump's Secret Service detail. Producers scrambling to process what had just occurred. Legal teams probably already drafting statements. But on stage, Jimmy stood alone in the center of a national reckoning, one he had invited but clearly wasn't prepared for. He took another breath and looked out into the crowd. "You know," he said, "when we book guests on this show, especially political ones, there's an understanding that we might argue, that we might clash. It's part of the deal. But what happened here tonight, that wasn't a debate. That was something else." He paced once in a slow circle, thinking aloud. "I thought I was calling out hypocrisy, racism, dangerous rhetoric, and maybe I was. But he didn't flinch. He leaned into it. He wanted the fight." A pause. "And he made some people listen. Maybe not agree, but listen." There were no cheers, no affirmations, just the quiet shuffle of a live audience struggling to recalibrate their expectations of a late-night talk show, now turned open political forum. Kimmel went on, his tone softening, but still firm. "I don't regret challenging him. I don't regret asking the hard questions. I think a lot of people wanted someone to finally say those things to his face. But I also saw what happened when we stopped listening and started assuming. He came here expecting to be attacked. I delivered." He looked toward the curtain again, now fully closed. "I wasn't wrong to push him. But maybe I was wrong to think shouting louder would mean I win," the crowd murmured. It wasn't applause, but it wasn't silence either. "Look," he said, "some things I still disagree with. Deeply. Passionately. But one thing stuck with me, and I hate that it did." He turned to the camera now, speaking directly to the nation. "Pretending problems don't exist doesn't make you a saint." He exhaled. "There is a problem at the border. There is fear in communities. There is a country that feels like it's pulling apart at the seams. And no amount of comedy, or sound bites, or applause breaks is going to fix that." He paused, then added, "But neither will walls or bans or tweets in all caps." This got a small laugh. A tired one. A flicker of the show returning to itself. "I believe in empathy, in inclusion, in lifting people up instead of tearing them down. But tonight was a reminder that if I really believe those things, I need to extend them even when it's uncomfortable. Even to people I find appalling. Otherwise, I'm just another actor reading lines. He finally sat. I don't agree with the president. I think some of the things he's said and done have hurt this country in ways we're still trying to process. But I do believe in having hard conversations and in hearing the other side, even when it makes your skin crawl. Kimmel folded. His hands, more subdued now. Tonight wasn't clean. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't TV. But maybe it was important. He looked back to the audience, then to the camera again. We're going to take a break. I think we all need one. He stood again, slower this time, and walked off the stage as the lights dimmed behind him. But before the screen faded to black, a new scene flickered on. Footage from just moments earlier. The backstage hallway. A single roaming camera had caught Trump as he walked with his security detail exiting the studio. He looked calm. He wasn't gloating. He didn't speak. But then, just before disappearing out of frame, he turned back to the camera and said simply, "It's not about winning. It's about waking people up." Then he walked out into the night. The next morning, Jimmy Kimmel Live trended globally. Not for a sketch, not for a viral joke, but for the fight, the fury, and the uncomfortable truths that bled through the screen. Social media split like a continental divide. Some called Kimmel a hero. Others said Trump had turned the tables. Hashtags flooded every platform. Think pieces popped up like wildfire. Was this the most honest moment on television in a decade? Had Kimmel gone too far? Had Trump actually made a valid point? Late-night hosts across other networks referenced it. Cable news debated it. Even major newspapers reprinted excerpts from the exchange, treating a talk show monologue like a presidential address. But perhaps the most surprising reaction came from viewers. Tens of thousands of letters, messages, and calls. From both sides, some praised Trump's composure. Others admired Kimmel's willingness to reflect, but almost all of them echoed one sentiment. Something about that didn't feel like TV. Backstage, Kimmel reportedly declined to do his usual post-show green room routine. No drinks, no wrap party, just a quiet exit, a handshake to the crew, and a ride home in silence. He later tweeted, "Last night was hard, necessary but hard. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll keep talking." And that was it. No spin, no meme. Just a moment that made everyone, audience and adversaries alike, feel a little less sure of themselves. And maybe that, more than any punchline, was the point.